All right, so today we're diving into something, well, let's just say it's a bit of a head scratcher.
Oh, intrigue already. I like it.
Right, so we're looking at this recent Israeli Air Force operation, took aim at Hezbollah, made some pretty bold claims.
Bold. How so?
Well, think 50 terrorists neutralized, 6 of them, bigwigs, commanders, the whole shebang. They were supposedly gearing up to, get this, invade Israel.
Ah, the classic invasion narrative. Always good for grabbing headlines.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. They threw like 100 jets at this thing.
100. That's a sizable chunk of their air power.
Yeah.
Definitely meant business.
No kidding. But that's where things get a little murky, right? We went digging, as one does, and found this Reddit thread, and let me tell you, people are not exactly buying everything they're hearing.
The court of public opinion can be a harsh mistress, especially in the age of instant information. What's the skepticism centered around?
Well, those casualty figures, for starters, specifically all those commanders supposedly taken out, people
Yeah.
are like, hold on, how many commanders can one organization actually have?
Yeah, it's almost become a bit of a running joke online. Every time there's a strike, another half-dozen commanders bite the dust.
Right. It's like, are we talking about a terrorist group or a really top-heavy corporation?
It does make you wonder about Hezbollah's org chart. I mean, they're not exactly known for their transparency.
Exactly. So how do we even begin to unpack this?
Mhm.
How do you define a commander in this context anyway?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? See, Hezbollah isn't your typical military outfit. They're this weird blend of, like, paramilitary force and political movement. So pinning down a clear leadership structure, well, good luck with that.
So it's not as simple as like looking at ranks and insignias.
Not even close. A commander could be a seasoned veteran, someone who's been calling the shots for years. Or it could be some guy who got a battlefield promotion last week because, well,
High turnover rate.
you catch on quick. It's messy, to say the least. And that's where things get really interesting, at least in this Reddit thread. Some users pointed out that maybe, just maybe, we're approaching this with the wrong measuring stick.
Meaning?
Well, think of it like measuring a coastline. The length changes depending on how close you zoom in. Same idea here. Maybe commander has a more fluid meaning in Hezbollah's world, broader than what we're used to.
The coastline paradox.
Yeah.
Interesting analogy. So how do we square that with, the official narrative?
That's the art of this whole thing, isn't it? It's all about context. We're dealing with a war zone, fog of information. Everyone's got an angle.
So healthy dose of skepticism is in order.
Always. And that's where digging into the details gets fun. Like, some users on Reddit brought up a point we can't ignore.
Which is?
Civilian casualties.
Yeah. Can't exactly gloss over that, especially with airstrikes.
Right, we're not talking about surgical strikes here. Things get messy, and that's where the thread got really real, really fast.
People grappling with the whole, cost of war thing.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the strategy, but at the end of the day, this is about human lives.
Absolutely.
And that's something it seems both sides of this conflict struggle with.
Right. Hezbollah embedding themselves within civilian areas certainly doesn't make things easier for anyone.
Nope. And that puts the Israelis in a tough spot, tactically and morally. It's a tightrope walk, for sure, minimizing civilian casualties while also, hitting back hard.
No easy answers there.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complicated when you start factoring in how they pulled this operation off in the first place. We're talking 100 jets, pinpoint strikes, someone knew exactly where to aim.
And the Reddit sleuths, they've got their theories.
Oh, I bet they do. Let's hear them.
Well, remember that whole pager bomb incident a few years back?
Vaguely. Refresh my memory.
So rumor has it the Israelis, they planted explosives in these, pagers. Hezbollah's communications network. Boom.
Wow. Straight out of a spy movie. But that takes some serious intel, long game stuff. Are we talking moles within Hezbollah?
That's the speculation. And if it's true, well, it paints a whole new picture, doesn't it?
No kidding. And it makes you wonder what other tricks they might have up their sleeve. Speaking of which, the assassination of that Iranian scientist, what was his name?
Mohsen Fakhrizadeh.
Yeah, him. That came up too. The whispers about AI-powered weaponry. Pretty wild stuff.
It's the future of warfare, right in front of our eyes. And it's equal parts fascinating and terrifying.
No doubt about that.
Yeah.
So, if Israel's really at the forefront of all this, where does that leave everyone else?
Yeah.
And what does it mean for future conflicts?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? We're talking about a whole new era of warfare, one where information might be even more powerful than firepower. And honestly, I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that yet. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does, really does. And it kind of reframes those jokes about the commanders, right? Like behind all those headlines, those casualty numbers, there's a real human cost. People forget that sometimes.
It's easy to get lost in the weeds, the strategy, the geopolitics. But yeah, at the heart of it, it's about people.
Absolutely. And speaking of human cost, we got to circle back to the whole civilian casualty issue. That Reddit thread, man, people had some strong opinions.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Emotions run high. You've got the whole debate about, the fog of war versus the sanctity of life. Where do you draw the line?
Right. It's easy to say avoid civilian casualties at all costs, but in the real world, with an enemy like Hezbollah embedded within civilian populations.
It gets messy. No way around it.
Exactly. So are the Israelis supposed to just, what, not retaliate?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? No easy answers in war. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking the hard questions, like, are there ways to achieve military objectives while minimizing civilian harm? Can you ever truly separate combatants from non-combatants in these kinds of conflicts?
Tough questions. And I think that's what makes that Reddit thread so fascinating. It's like this microcosm of like the whole moral dilemma of war.
It really is. You've got people advocating for restraint, others saying, look, this is war, there will be casualties.
And then you've got those stories, those personal accounts. Someone mentioned attending funerals in Lebanon, family members caught in the crossfire. That hits hard.
It's a reminder that these aren't just statistics we're talking about.
Right.
They're real people with lives, families, dreams.
It's heavy stuff. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, even with all this talk of advanced tech, precision strikes, is there any way to truly wage war without, this level of human suffering?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you could argue that greater intelligence, more targeted capabilities,
Right.
they could potentially lead to fewer civilian casualties in the long run.
It's
But,
always a but.
right, there's the flip side. The more precise, the more detached we become from the human cost, the easier it becomes to justify, to rationalize. And that's a scary thought.
It is. It's like the more advanced we become technologically, the more important it is to remember, our humanity.
Exactly. Technology without conscience, without empathy, that's a dangerous road to go down. And it's something we need to be very, very mindful of as we navigate, this brave new world of 21st century warfare.
No doubt about it. So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway for, the average person trying to make sense of all this?
It's tough to say. Honestly, I think the biggest takeaway might be that there are no easy answers. We're dealing with complex issues, moral gray areas.
And a whole lot of unknowns. A
Well,
whole lot of unknowns, yeah. But hey, that's kind of what makes these deep dives so interesting, right? You start with a headline, you end up down this rabbit hole of like geopolitics and ethics and the future of warfare.
and let's be real, this rabbit hole, it's got some pretty wild twists and turns.
No kidding. But if we're talking unknowns, I got to ask, what does all this mean for the future? I mean, if Israel's already playing chess on this whole other level, where does that leave everyone else?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, are we witnessing the dawn of some new kind of warfare? One where information, intel, cyber stuff, that's the new front line.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Like,
Yeah.
imagine instead of tanks and troops, you've got algorithms and hackers duking it out in cyberspace.
And the scary thing is, that's not some far-off sci-fi scenario, right? We're
Mhm.
already seeing it happening. Think Stuxnet, that whole thing with the Iranian nuclear program.
Right. That was wild. The computer virus basically crippled their centrifuges. No bombs, no bullets, just code.
Exactly. And if that's the playing field now, it raises some seriously uncomfortable questions. Like, does it make war more likely? Because if you can take out your enemy's infrastructure, their command and control, without, the same level of risk.
It's tempting, right. Less messy, politically speaking.
Exactly. And that's terrifying because the threshold for using force, it just got a whole lot lower.
And then there's the whole Pandora's box aspect. Once these technologies are out there, who's to say they won't fall into the wrong hands? Terrorist groups, rogue states, you name it.
It's the ultimate nightmare scenario, isn't it? Cyber weapons in the hands of someone who doesn't play by the rules, who doesn't care about collateral damage.
Not a comforting thought. So what do we do? Just, hope for the best.
I wish it were that simple. No, I think the first step is talking about it, shining a light on these issues. Because ignorance is not bliss in this case. It's dangerous.
Right. We can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend this isn't happening.
Yeah.
So what's the call to action then? What can the average person, listening to this deep dive, what can they do?
Honestly, I think awareness is the first step. The more we educate ourselves about these technologies, the potential risks, the ethical dilemmas, the better equipped we are to demand better from our leaders.
Demand better in what sense?
In every sense, demand transparency, accountability, push for international cooperation, for treaties that limit the development and use of these weapons.
Because the alternative is, what? A cyber free-for-all. Nobody wants that.
Exactly. We're talking about the future of warfare here, but it's bigger than that. It's about the future we want to create, the world we want to live in. And that takes all of us, engaged, informed, and demanding better.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in, a lot to process, but that's kind of the point, right? We're not here to offer easy answers, just hopefully some food for thought.
Exactly. Consider it fuel for those late-night what-if conversations.
And hey, if you find yourself down a Reddit rabbit hole because of it, all the better. The more we talk about these things, the better off we'll be. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.